Hello and welcome to episode 64 of the Trapping Today podcast. I'm your host, Jeremiah Wood. Podcast is brought to you by Kaatz Brothers Lures. That's Kaatz with two A's, Kaatz, bros.com. Solid guys, great sponsor. They've been with us since day one at trappingtoday.com, and they've been sponsoring the podcast for quite a long time now. And I've been talking about them forever, but now, tonight, is your chance to hear from Kyle from Kaatz Brothers, one of the two brothers. Talk a little bit more about the business and about trapping. I'm really excited to bring this interview to you. What else is going on in my world? Well, this is usually a slow time of year when I get caught up and get things done, and it's been stupid busy. So I've been running around. I just got back from a 3-day stint in the woods, which I always love. It was not a trapping trip, but it wasn't all that bad. Stayed in the cabin by myself and got a fair little bit of work done. Always enjoy being out in the woods. Beautiful, beautiful area, nice and quiet, and just a great spot. So getting back from that, just normal day-to-day things are just hitting all at once here, and so there's just a million things going on, and I will talk to you about that in the next episode. We'll get into some of the trapping-related things that I have going on. Excited to talk more about that. But for now, let's get into this interview. I'm really happy that I finally got Kyle on. He's real busy. They got a lot going on there. But I had the chance to get him on the phone, and we had a great conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy the podcast, and we'll get into it. I'm with Kyle Kaatz from Kaatz Brothers Lures in Savannah, Illinois. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing real good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. So I first found out about you guys back when you contacted me about advertising on Trapping Today, back before the podcast. And I was really excited to do business with you because of, after getting to know you a little bit, your outlook and mindset and forward-thinking attitude about business and trapping. I thought that was really neat and consistent with a lot of the things that I try to do. But anyway, it's great. Been talking about you quite a bit on the podcast for about 6 months now. But it's great to finally have a chance for listeners to hear from you.
Well, I appreciate it. I guess time kind of gets away from me, but I was hoping you would ask me to be on at some point.
Yeah. So could you start by maybe giving us a little overview of who you are and what you guys do?
Well, I guess that's a tough question to answer because it seems like it changes every day almost. But I guess the whole Kaatz Brothers Lures started in 1995. I was a sophomore in high school, and I was writing some articles for the Fur Taker magazine, and I decided I needed to write a book. And after that book came out, I tried to get different dealers to carry it, and that kind of opened the door to my 15-year-old mindset of, hey, I don't want to go to college. I don't like school. I don't like authority. And I see the potential here to get all my trapping supplies for free if I can sell some. So that theory, that 15-year-old theory led to a lot of daydreaming and thoughts and ideas. And I guess about a week ago I had we use QuickBooks Online, and they reach out all the time for different input, focus group type stuff, and they reached out about a week ago, and they kind of asked me the same question you did. And at the end of it, she said, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about business, what would it be? And I kind of laughed. I said, I don't know that I would change anything other than maybe I'd look ahead to see what business looks like 5 years out, just to get a peek, maybe to prepare. But overall, I think I wake up every day and do what I dreamed of doing when I was 15 years old. It's just that sometimes when you're young and you have these great aspirations, it's not 20/20 vision. You have an idea, but you don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to look like. And now looking back, I could say, okay, kid, you had the right vision here. This is this is exactly what I needed and what I wanted now. But it's taken 24 years later. It looks very much like them daydreams. It's just like I say, on a day-to-day basis, it seems like we're sometimes at the mercy of orders, and just before you called, I was rushing around trying to get a pallet out. Today we're dealing with -3 and blizzards across the Midwest. So it's
Nice.
Today I was playing the part of a logistics specialist, I guess, and that's sometimes a little bit of a challenge because the 15-year-old me didn't understand or comprehend some of the challenges that business would face on a day-to-day basis now, other than, hey, I like to trap, I like to make lure, and I like to write. Where can it go from here? And so here we are now, a full-fledged trapping supply company, and that's a real short version of 24 years, I guess.
Did you always think it was going to be kind of a straight, just focused, just trapping supply type company, or were you always kind of looking for new things to branch into and try out?
I maybe tried different things at times, and I kind of go back to I've heard some smart business people. I had merged my business. I lived in Minnesota for 1.5 years and worked with Tim Caven, and one of the things Tim always said was, stick with what you're good at. And that his words always kind of echo in my mind. That's really good advice. And I've also, my wife and I, we watch Shark Tank like mad, and on Shark Tank, Mark Cuban has. I don't know if it was on Shark Tank or an interview I read where Mark Cuban said, "Diversification is for idiots. Stick with what you know." And I think that's something that's it's very true. I'm not probably the smartest businessman there is, but in this industry, I can sure pretend like it because I understand the product. I can relate to the customer. Now, if I was to branch off into another business, there very well could be a disconnect with the customer, or maybe a lack of knowledge with the product or the service, and I think that could lead to some setbacks. So I guess, do I have aspirations for other businesses? Less and less all the time. Everything revolves around the fur industry and trapping, because that's what I can relate to, and
Sure.
and I feel most comfortable with. And I'm not that I'm afraid, but it just wouldn't make sense to jump into something different where there's a lot of other risks.
There's enough to do in the trapping industry, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yes. Uh-huh.
I'm pretty fascinated by you being a teenager and trying to break into this business. What was that like? It must have been pretty intimidating and difficult at times.
Well, the one thing I can say looking back is when I sit here now, whenever I have a chance to deal with somebody that's younger, boy, I try to bend over backwards because I see a reflection of myself.
Yep.
But the biggest thing I learned is, looking back, being that 15-year-old, you run into some challenges, and you also find out a lot about people that are established. And one person that comes to mind, that when I was like 15 and Kellen, my brother, was 13, and we were going to some conventions, I was real afraid to talk on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I would write letters and request catalogs, and we started ordering lure bottles from Sterling Fur. And my dad took us to the Fur Takers Convention in LaGrange, Indiana, and we had a bunch of used traps we had gathered up, and we were selling them. And Keith Winkler, the owner of Sterling Fur, came by and said, "Hey, I noticed you guys have been ordering some lure bottles. I wanted to give you a wholesale catalog."
Nice.
Well, that was just kind of a chance thing. And at first, once I got that wholesale catalog, it like opened up a whole new world to me, that, hey, we could buy stuff from Sterling, and I could actually start selling other things besides used traps and lure. And I was afraid to make phone calls. This is pre-internet, so we're getting to be like 96, 97. It was 97.
So
I
you
guess,
had to do a lot on the phone.
Yeah, you had to do a lot on the phone. So I would write up things, and my mom would let us. She would give us a credit card number, and I could give her the money, and I'd have Kellen call and talk to Keith to place these orders. And Keith has been very much one of my best friends and mentors in this business. And I mean, we ever since then, I mean, we've always done a lot of business. But Keith was somebody that, as I went from 15 to 18 to 21, he always was really supportive, bend over backwards to do whatever he could to make me successful. And so and it wasn't just Keith, there was, I mean, other people along the way. I'd mentioned Tim Caven that really were quick to say, hey, I can give you extended terms or work with me to allow me to succeed. And, so there was those people, which I would say they were not in the majority. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of that, I can remember getting told, this was a little bit later when I took over as editor at Trapper's World. I remember one established guy saying, I think he's too young to have all these experiences. And I remember another guy he had bought out a pretty big trapping supply company, and after I left Minnesota, I went back on my own. I remember him saying, I don't think Kyle will be around much longer. He's not going to make it and all this stuff. And I heard that. I heard that really loud and clear. And in a sense, people saying that motivated me more than the Tim Cavens and the Keith Winklers that were willing to help me.
Sure, absolutely.
So I guess, if I had started the business when I was 30, I wouldn't have had the knowledge or the experience of getting to see the difference in how you're treated by other businesses and by other respected people in the industry. Right. So I think starting young, it offers an advantage, but it also offers huge challenges, because it's hard. It's sometimes hard to be taken serious, and we have customers and suppliers that have been with us since those early years, and I really value those people that supported us and were willing to try our lures when I couldn't even grow a beard. So it's definitely been a long road in that respect, but it's to look back on it, I mean, you learn a lot and can kind of, the hindsight is always 20/20, and I guess the more time goes on, the more you're able to look ahead and see it more clearly and be able to predict how different business things are going to work out.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about, you mentioned that you merged with Minnesota Trapline products, and I'm kind of curious, like, how did that come about? Why did you do that? And
that was something that Tim offered to me, and I guess I was at a stage in my life where I felt that that was the right thing to do at that time. And
were you you were just getting started when was that?
This was I moved to Minnesota in the fall of 2005.
Okay.
And then I moved back to Illinois here in the spring of 2007. It was definitely interesting, and not too long ago, Tim and I we talked a lot about that time, and I really respect Tim a lot. He's like I said, he's been a real mentor and a good friend in business, and that experience of going there, it really was enlightening. Minnesota Trapline is I would say one of the top two retailers in this business. So at that time, going there, I mean, it really opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Yeah, just the scale of the operation must have been pretty amazing to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's I guess one of the biggest things is it's like, when I left Minnesota, I thought, I want to grow really big. And then after a couple of years, it's like, I don't want to be that big. I want to be a little bit smaller, and have some time to do what I want. However, sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. because you are kind of at the mercy of the orders. And like for us, this past fall has been probably the most hectic we've had, from the standpoint of last summer. My wife and I had a baby, so I didn't work a lot during the summer. And thank you. So that kind of put a lot of pressure on my brother, and we're kind of starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But when I guess when I'm crazy busy, I kind of look back to some of the lessons I learned in Minnesota, and that knowledge is just invaluable.
So where do you see Kaatz Brothers' role or niche in the trapping industry? Where do you guys kind of sit as far as what you do?
That's a good question, because I think overall in the trapping industry, everybody is competitive, but we all kind of have our own niche thing. For us, we sell a lot of fox, coyote, bobcat. The urine business has really been a big staple of our existence, I guess. And of course, lure and bait. We do a lot of private label, and we also sell a lot of raw materials, ground meats, glands, and stuff to other lure makers. So I would say that's kind of where we fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't necessarily happen on purpose. It just one of them things that just as time went on, it's kind of just developed that way. It wasn't necessarily a goal of mine or something I set out to do. It just kind of worked out that way. We kind of fell into some different deals where we could get certain urines and certain raw materials, and also there's some other people that happened to retire at the same time, which left us with a market waiting that we just it was kind of luck, and that old business adage of it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yep.
That has come into play so many times over the past 24 years, and it happens that way. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just you know the right people, and things line up, and then all at once, hey, that's what we do now.
Right. You try it and it works, and then you kind of build on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you guys, so you still do, I know Kellen had a new DVD and video out. You're still doing the book and DVD stuff.
Yeah. This year, I don't think we won't have any new books or DVDs, but that has been a good part of our business too. As far as like making DVDs, it's something we've enjoyed. And writing, I think the whole business started on writing, and I guess Kellen and I both would kind of talk like moving ahead. I would say we would have a new book out before we have the next DVD out.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there's something kind of old school about reading that, we both like to read, and it seems that customers too, there's something valuable about having a book. It's just a little bit old school versus DVDs, I think. And the other thing about DVDs is now, like with YouTube being so prevalent, everybody can watch trapping stuff nonstop.
Right.
So I don't know, 5 years from now, producing a DVD, it may be something where videos are simply downloaded off of websites and not actually sold as DVDs. I don't know, but it seems like that could happen, which is kind of a challenge because there's a lot of money tied up in DVD inventories across the industry.
Absolutely.
So
yep.
that's a big potential challenge for sure.
And I guess the one advantage in the trapping industry is it seems to be 5-10 years behind a lot of other industries as far as technology.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely changing fast, and it's going to be a challenge to see how people can continue to monetize, trapping videos and even books with all that information available. But
yeah. Well, and that's one thing too. Like you look at some of the bigger suppliers that carry all the different DVDs, and like just talked about Minnesota Trapline, F&T. You look at the amount of the choices they have, and there's a big amount of dollars tied up in all them different DVDs that all at once, if the industry does kind of catch up to modern society where nobody really wants to buy a DVD, that's going to hurt. And so that's a challenge that I foresee for the entire industry coming down the road, just like VHS tapes turned into DVDs. Is what are DVDs going to turn into next? Is it going to be downloads? Is it going to be all on YouTube? Is it? I would say that somehow it's going to be online in some form or another, versus when you step back and look at books, I still think we're a long ways away from books being obsolete.
Yeah.
It's just...
there is something about a physical book.
Right.
So, well, not to shift gears too fast, but I'm kind of curious about the story of the TS-85 and how you got involved in that. Because that's becoming a very popular trap. A lot of people that I trap around really like it for beaver trapping. So, and I noticed that Kaatz Brothers Lures name is on the pan of that trap. Yeah.
That's just a random thing. Who you know, and it's not what you know; it's who you know. And Tim and Brent Swatsky in Minnesota, they make the trap, and Tim had mentioned he was working on it, and this was, let me put my dates together here. It would have been the late fall of '07, I believe. I met Tim when I lived in Minnesota and got to know him, hunted ducks with him, and not to get too far off base, but Tim Swatsky is a name very few people know, but he is probably the premier water trapper in the country.
Really?
The numbers that him and Brent produce are just incredible, phenomenal catches. Probably, like I say, there's hardly anybody that has the experience and the just mind-boggling catches of mink and muskrats and coon that they have. And so I naturally hit it off with Tim Swatsky, and he had mentioned that he was kind of looking for somebody to market the trap, and he sent me 3 TS-85s, just prototypes basically. And that winter I went to Alabama to trap beaver, and I used them, and I really liked them. Nothing against the other beaver footholds, but having that extra jaw spread, I immediately noticed I was a better beaver trapper, and I was confident in using MB750s and CDRs. I always liked MB750, and I was confident. I thought I was a pretty good beaver foothold trapper, and then having that extra inch, I really noticed, like, holy cow, my catch jumped up. And I think that extra inch, sometimes it is a matter of inches, and
right.
That extra inch, your catch per visit ratio, I think, goes up. So I was all fired up about it. I really liked the trap. It was easy to set. It required very little as far as adjustments go. And so I started talking to Tim, and I happened, again, it's just one of them things lined up. He kind of had he kind of broke it down for me. He had some expense with tools and with the dies and the manufacturing of getting it going, and he kind of broke it down and said, I need you to buy this many, and if you can do it, let's make this deal, basically. And I just happened to, at that point, I happened to have a line of credit deal come through, and I had the money, and I sent him a check in advance, and I felt real good about it. And he said, "What do you want me to put on the pan?" So that's how our name got on the pan. And since then, it's just I like working with Tim Swatsky a lot. Him and Brent both are very, very smart as far as making or as far as building traps, and they are kind of the silent genius behind a lot of different products in this business.
Really?
And I won't say any more than that, but that's that the TS-85 is all on them. That's all their creation. We simply just fell into the marketing of it.
So they still build all the TS-85s, and you guys distribute them, basically.
Yep. They ship them to us, and yeah, we're basically the sole distributor. So we send them to the different dealers from here.
Nice. That's pretty cool. Have you had the opportunity to do something else like that with other products?
Yeah, but none of them ever really worked out very well.
We only hear about the successes, right?
Yeah, early on, we did have an opportunity to work with a guy that it was about 97, I think, that we were going to distribute his modified traps. And looking back at the time, I didn't realize that the man had some alcoholism issues, and it never really worked out. I didn't really lose anything, but I didn't really gain anything, and I invested a lot of time.
Yep.
So that was a bit of a challenge there. As far as the TS-85, we've not had anything really work out that way since. I tried some different deals. I guess behind the scenes, nobody would ever know I even tried to get certain products, but I did. And looking back, I'm glad some of those deals didn't fall into place, because ultimately we see a lot of products in this business that they're not real sustainable. When they come out new, they sell like mad. You can make money on them. Trappers are happy. But then a year or two later, you find out, you know what, that product wasn't real good. There's some flaws with it. People get upset. It hurts sales. The people that do have it want to either return it, or they sell it used at a convention or on eBay, and all at once it's like, well, it was kind of
really
a
one-hit wonder on that, right?
Yeah, you don't really that those kind of things are tough. Whereas I think for us, the TS-85, through our dealer network, and I think I think some of the different dealers kind of helped sell the trap, having it on their websites and in their catalogs. And then also I think a lot of like last year we sold more TS-85s than the first year they were available. Wow. And I think some of it is guys modifying them to use on wolves too.
Oh,
so
really?
that has added another element to TS-85 sales.
So they're obviously they're four-coiling, and what else are they doing to modify them?
I think that's a trapper preference thing, and we have talked about offering a modified TS-85. The only thing that's really holding us back is trappers' opinions. So, however we would modify it would only suit certain trappers' needs, and I think a guy in Alaska trapping wolves is different than a guy in Ontario trapping wolves,
absolutely.
Or a guy in Idaho. So there's a lot of variance there. A lot of guys are four-coiling them. Of course, the chain system, that's where you really get into a lot of varied opinions. Not necessarily a heavier chain, but more swivels, a longer chain. The jaws is another thing as far as how you laminate it. It's an inside lamination on the 85 requires a lot of extra adjustment because of the pan system.
Yeah.
So you're looking more like an outside lamination. And then some guys are also basically taking the lamination all the way down on the inside of the jaws to reinforce. Okay. I don't, myself personally, I don't think it's a problem, but some wolf trappers want it where the jaw reaches the base plate. They want that heavier, thicker.
They don't want the jaw to pop out, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, they're welded, but the jaws where they do get a little bit thinner as they taper down, which it adds a little bit of speed when the jaws close. But it's different when they're closing on a beaver's foot in the water versus a wolf's foot in -20 in Alaska.
Sure.
So they're looking at some different elements of weather and the whole environment in which they trap and how that affects the trap. So the modification end of it, I think there's a lot of varied. And again, I've never trapped a wolf. I've never even set a trap for a wolf. So I'm going off of just customer input on the wolf side of the modifications and the different wolf trappers I've talked to. There's a lot of varied opinions. No different than any other animal, but that's kind of prevented. We basically said, to get into offering a modified TS-85, that's going to create a lot more work for Tim and Brent, and it forces us to have a whole nother inventory of traps, and that is such a niche market that I think for now, we're better off just letting the trapper modify them themselves from a business standpoint.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, Kyle, before we get too far along and finish things up, I kind of overlooked the fact that you are a trapper and you've done a lot of trapping over the years in a lot of different states. So I'm kind of curious. I think people would be interested to hear how you got started trapping. We always like to ask how different people got started.
Well, I was kind of born into it. On my dad's side, both my great-grandpas trapped. And my grandpa trapped, my dad trapped when he was little, and then the family kind of moved to the suburbs of Chicago, so they still hunted, but trapping wasn't really accessible. And then when Kellen and I got into, I think I was about 12, and my dad owned property, which is where I now live in Savannah, Illinois, which is about 3 hours from where we grew up in the south suburbs. We would come over here on the weekends, and my uncle would set some traps. And the one deer season we were over here, he caught a beaver and a raccoon. And that, I always knew what trapping was. My dad had traps hanging on the wall. We'd set them, snap pencils in them when I was a kid, when I was 5, 6 years old. Mm-hmm. So I was aware of what trapping was. But when my uncle caught that beaver and that raccoon, that just really, kind of inspired me a little bit. And then we had to sell magazine subscriptions for school for some kind of field trip or something, and I was never really a big school kid. I didn't particularly like school, and when we had field trips, I normally would tell my mom, hey, could I just be sick that day? Since it's a field trip anyhow. And so one of the field trips, I don't remember where we were going, but we had to sell magazine subscriptions. And my mom said, how about for your birthday, we had to sell 2. She said, how about for your birthday, you just pick out 2 magazines, and I'll buy them for you, and then that will, you don't have to sell anymore. Well, I picked out for Fish and Game and Sports Afield. Yep. And I still get I still get for Fish and Game now. I don't even know if Sports Afield exists, to be honest.
It's changed a lot.
I just, once I got them first Fish and Games, and at the time, Red Fox, again, it wasn't an Illinois Red Fox, it was like a Wyoming, Montana Red Fox, could be worth up to $40. Mm-hmm. And a light just went off in my head, oh my God, $40 walks under my tree stand almost every day. So I could be rich, I could come home from the cabin with $80 every week if I shot this fox with my bow. Yep. And that was again the 12-year-old thought in my brain. And so that kind of just lit the fire, and we were fortunate as far as living in a family that had trapping experience and knowledge. And my dad's side of the family's from northeastern Wisconsin, so all the great uncles and everything trapped. Yeah. So it was very easy to talk to trappers. It was very hard to find information. I randomly came across, we were at the Ed Shirley's bait and tackle fishing store, and they had a magazine rack, and they had a trapper and predator caller there. And I saw that, and it was the holy grail lit up. I have to have this. And of course, I immediately subscribed, and that really was game-changing then, because it was nothing against Fur Fish and Game, but
it wasn't all trapping.
Trapper and predator caller in the back that had all the associations. So then that led me to the Illinois Trappers Association, and just a more I was a little more in tune with the industry, and that's how, reading those magazines, I got to know who Charlie Dobbins was, and different people like that, and that kind of furthered the whole thought process then for a few years, to where I started writing, and we gained a few permissions, and then I graduated high school earlier with the idea that I was going to trap Iowa and be rich, which is a whole other story. But I graduated high school in January, and then that following fall was my first real forte into state hopping, and I failed miserably, but that was the biggest educational trap line I've ever ran, really. And that's the big thing. I guess I've trapped a lot of different places, and now business is such and I'm not the best trapper. I've not caught the most animals, but I've reached a lot of my trap line goals. So a lot of my goals now are not necessarily centered around trapping. They're more centered around the business. So when I do trap, it's more of a reminiscent thing. I trapped, my grandpa passed away, but there's a lot of places that he walked with me or rode in the canoe that I go back to, and it's just fun to be there and to relive those memories. And that's kind of I'm not trying to trap to make my truck payment. I've been there and I've done that, and that was an accomplishment in itself. But now when I do set traps, it's just a whole different mindset. And I think sometimes some of our customers can't necessarily always understand that because they expect, I think sometimes the image is that I'm starting in the fall, I'm running a long line for coon, and then I'm going down south and I'm trapping beaver, and then I'm going and catching coyotes in the desert, and it's just physically impossible to do all that and run a business.
Yeah.
And I'm at a stage in my life where I could go and do all that, but my wife would not appreciate it one bit. The bank would hate me, and I wouldn't have anything to come home to because I wouldn't be able to pay my bills.
And you wouldn't have much fun doing that then.
Yeah. So it's like I guess life is always full of trade-offs, and I don't really consider it a trade-off as much as the next phase, the new goal, the goals I have now with family, with business. They're way more alluring to me than saying, can I go catch 1,000 coon, or I need to go trap bobcats, or it's different mindset, and maybe it's a little bit of maturity. And like I say, I kind of view things differently than I did when I was 21, and I felt like I had to prove myself as a trapper in order to sell my products.
Right, and yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, for sure. It's funny though, because I have younger people watch my YouTube videos and ask, "Do you trap full time? Is this what you do?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah. Well, and that's that dream, that allure. It's really such a fine line there, because I don't want to discourage anybody,
right?
But I also feel like you have to be realistic, and the idea of trapping full time is great. I think we all look forward to just when we have nothing to do for the day but wake up and check traps is a great feeling. Any trapper can relate to. We want more of it. But if you have responsibilities, you may only get to do that for 2 weeks when you can take off work, or some trappers work a job where they're laid off during the winter.
Yep.
There's a lot of different things that play into somebody's time, but I don't think, or take for example a kid that's 16 and can only trap over his Christmas break, let's say.
Right.
And I really don't think that there's plenty of 16-year-olds out there that can only trap over their Christmas break, and they may only be able to, let's say, trap their family farm, and they catch what they can in that 2 weeks. They are no less a trapper than a guy that is catching 3,000 coon a year or catching huge, crazy numbers. There's this notion that people judge trappers by how much they catch. And I learned a long time ago that that's really irrelevant, because you're up against so many different things. And, for example, you can't, you live in Maine, I live in Illinois. You're going to catch less coon than me. It doesn't make you less of a coon trapper. It just, coon don't really like to live in Maine. They like it in Illinois. No different than I'm not going to be a very successful marten trapper in Illinois because they don't live here. So people forget that we all deal with different animal populations. So the overall end catch is not a real good judgment of how good of a trapper somebody is. And then the other aspect of that is, okay, trapping full time, there's a lot of pressure with that. Yes. And, a lot of society doesn't do well with that pressure. That's why not everybody owns a business, and a lot of people wake up and go to work and do a job, they work for a company or they work for somebody else.
Absolutely.
Because there's some security in that. They know, hey, on Friday I'm going to get my paycheck. It's going to be this much. I can pay my bills, and next week I do it all over again after I enjoy the weekend.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fine. That is what drives America, and that is perfectly fine. That person, though, doesn't have as much time to trap as somebody that is trapping supposed full time. And now, like on a local level, a lot of the people that are like our local customers that trap full time, a lot of them are one, retired, and then the other aspect of them are people that don't have jobs, and it's not because they got laid off or unemployed. It's because they don't have the real gumption or the ability to hold down a job, so they trap a little bit, but claim they're a full-time trapper. Right. And so that's another aspect. But I mean, I guess overall, like being a full-time trapper, I would still say to somebody, you know what, have a career, have a job where you can take time off and go hog wild trapping, because you can make some money trapping. Even this year, you could make a profit trapping. It'd be difficult.
It depends where you're at.
But you could do it. But you can't make enough profit during that time to pay your bills all through summer.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just,
yeah. If you just look at it, the months that you trap.
Yeah. Which, I mean, there's plenty of guys. I do know some guys that are real successful. They trap in the fall for fur, and they have good nuisance businesses, which is definitely a very viable career option. There's a lot of career opportunity there, but again, it also goes back to you have to be in an area where people have animal problems to have that to have that job or have that option.
Yes. Yeah, you got to be around a lot of people, and most of us trappers like to be in rural areas, away from people.
Yeah.
But just wanted to go back and touch on that thing you spoke about. Catching 1,000 coon doesn't make you the best coon trapper. The thing that I try to focus on is how much did I learn with each animal that I caught? Because there's a lot of guys that just have one formula and this is how they trap for coons, and they might catch several hundred coons, but if they're not open-minded and learning all the time, they're not going to be a better trapper than the young guy just getting started out who's constantly learning.
Absolutely. The one thing I will say is, like, my best year in Iowa in 2001, I learned very little because the only thing in my brain was, I need to get back in the truck and get on to the next stop. I was totally focused on time management and production. So I was kind of just going hog wild and not really paying attention. I had a system that I used. I was primarily relying on pocket sets. I had a system with my maps and how I kept track of things. And I just was basically implementing that system. I was going to bed a lot of nights after skinning about midnight and getting up at 2:30, and so you're not functioning at your best.
Yeah.
So during that season, it was my best production season. As far as actually learning or becoming a better trapper, I didn't. I was a better trapper. I learned more when I was 15, or in some of the recent years. A couple of years ago, I said, I'm just going to trap muskrats. So I trapped I had permission on a small pond. I trapped 2 swamp areas here on our own property, and then I trapped the backwaters of the Mississippi. And I went slow. I wasn't trying to set any records. I think I caught 146 muskrats. But in that couple, I think I trapped maybe 3 weeks or so.
Yep.
I guess I trapped the bulk of those. I caught like 125 of the muskrats in the first 5 days, I think. And then I pretty much, the rest of the time, I caught some beaver and some coon and stuff too. But I kind of, once I kind of burnt out some areas, I pulled. Instead of spending more time in the canoe and just paying attention. And it was like, I had to step back, and it's like, this trapping season, I have learned more. That was the fall, let me think. That was the fall of 16.
Yep.
In that 2016 trapping season, I learned more than I had in probably 20 years trapping, because I had no pressure. I was not trying to set the world on fire. I was simply trapping the animals that were there. And like I say, I was thinking about, that was the fall after my grandpa passed away, so that was fresh on my memory, so I was like trapping some of the places that I would spend with him. I trapped the places where I caught my first coon and my first muskrats, and it was just like I started to learn the learning process. Like I kind of had forgotten about that, and I felt like after 2016, it's like, that wasn't my best year numbers wise, but as far as education, I felt like, hey, you know what? I furthered my beaver. I'm a little bit better of a beaver and muskrat trapper now than I was before that season started.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that. Sometimes about, what can you learn from each catch? If you can slow down and look at that, it's way more valuable than any DVD or book you could buy.
And especially in a low market when you're not going to get a lot for the fur anyway. I figure
right.
If you can learn during the low market, then all of a sudden if things pick back up, you can go out there and really be efficient and catch some fur.
Yeah, yep, for sure.
Well, hey Kyle, I know you're a busy man. This has been a lot of fun. But you probably
I think if we have the time, the hard thing about this is, and I mean, if you got any more questions, I got a couple more minutes. We could keep talking. But the funny thing is, like, I'm not done many interviews or anything like this. Like I mentioned about a week ago, I did that QuickBooks thing where they were wanting to talk more about business and stuff. And then after I hang up the phone, like my brother can hear the conversation we're having. The rest of the day, we're going to have about 4 or 5 hours of stories that we have forgotten about. It's just, that's how it always works.
Absolutely. Well, the beauty is
you've
we can have you back on for more, for sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe any time here we get into the spring, I'd be happy to talk with you some more. It's kind of fun to, like I say, look back and just some of the questions you ask, it makes me think of different things. And like I said, we don't have enough time to kind of like go through it all, but so many people and different things that have happened and conventions, and just the industry. I mean, it makes me think of just so many fun times and funny stories that you don't think about until somebody asks you about them.
Yeah, we didn't even get into you trapping in Maine. Someday I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, that's one of them other short. To sum that up, that's kind of like the first year in Iowa. That's brutal. Like, Maine trappers have my total respect. That's one of the worst places you could be a trapper because of the conditions. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of stuff there that is just to me it's maybe not as hard as like Alaska, but you're far enough north that a lot of us in the Midwest don't deal with anything near the conditions that trappers in Maine deal with.
Yeah. So before we wrap it up, is there anything else you want to say or share with people or something that I missed maybe?
No, just like I say, thanks for having me on. It's just definitely fun to talk, and you probably inspired a day's worth of conversation and stories now Kellen and I will be talking about that I haven't thought about in some time. And keep up the good work. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, absolutely. Earl, take care, Kyle, and we'll catch up with you again.
All right, thanks, Jeremiah.
Okay, bye.